Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm Alex Epstein. Sorry I missed 3 weeks in a row. I guess I missed 1 week, but usually I do this every 2 weeks, almost like clockwork. And last week I skipped, and I guess even before that I had a best of episode. So it's been, over a month since I've had a new episode. So hope you were able to listen to some old episodes in the meantime and enjoyed the best of, but I am back with a new episode this week. This week's episode is entitled The Joy of Security. The Joy of Security. And it's inspired by a transformation I've been going through for the past 10 or 20 years. And I think that there's probably a lot of parallels between the way that I have for a long time thought about the issue of security, including but not limited to financial security, and then the issue of joy. So my basic view of security, particularly financial security, is this is kind of a boring subject. This is the kind of thing that accountants think about. It's something that you have to do, but it comes at the expense of enjoyment. Like, if I want to do something fun with my friends, that takes money, and that may eat into potential money that I could invest, particularly early in my career when I'm not making as much money. So it feels like, joy means doing these things with my friends and buying different kinds of things. And there is definitely joy in a lot of things in that category. And the security is just like, oh God, I got to do this. It's certainly not fun for me, or wasn't fun for me to think about. And then it just kind of seems like, it's just sort of about the future. And I think maybe my future will be better, but I certainly have the idea of, I care about now. I don't want to just postpone everything to the future. I want to live. So I don't want to just the subject of security had this negative kind of feel, this boring kind of feel to it. And the other aspect I think that made me think more, like not want to think all that much about security, particularly financial security, was, we live in a modern world. It's not like I'm actually going to starve to death. There are things like you can use credit cards if you need to, or you have different kinds of friends or family who might be able to help you out. It's not like, I'm actually going to starve. So that makes it seem even more like, why should I focus so much on security? Like, I want to make sure I enjoy my life now and enjoy my life in the future, and I'll probably figure it out. And so, why worry too much about security? Why take if I don't have much money, why, for instance, take money, or, why not get as nice a place, or not eat, my favorite foods, or not go on certain kinds of trips? That just seems like, an unnecessary kind of sacrifice to make. And I've come to think of this issue quite differently, as evidenced by the title of this episode, The Joy of Security. I think that there's actually an enormous harmony between enjoying life and having financial security and what I'm going to call time security. I may think of a better name for that eventually, but I'm going to everything I say applies to financial security, but it applies to other kinds of security, and I think you'll see why that's important. So let me talk about my current definition of security, or time security. So I think of it as, financial security basically means that your expected resources outstrip your future financial needs. So, the resources that you expect to have, that you can reasonably expect to have, including your savings and investments, which, you can really expect to have those to a significant degree, that outstrips your future needs. So in that state, I think you're financially secure. So the broader idea of security that I find particularly helpful is the idea of my expected resources outstrip my current commitments and my expected threats. So I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important. It's my expected resources outstrip my current commitments and my expected threats. So let's deal with what are all three of those. So expected resources, the most important one is time, like the finite amount of time that I expect to have, because I can do different things in time, including making money in time. So time is the ultimate currency, but then it also includes money, financial resources, or things that can be converted into financial resources, and then ability. So, different kinds of ability. So I'll give you an example that's close to my heart, which is you think about something like a book deadline, which I've been dealing with for the past several years. So I have very nearly completed my latest book, and I'm now definitely at the point of security with it, which means that my expected resources outstrip my commitments. That is, I have some more to do, but I'm past the point where there's uncertainty about, will I be able to do this on time? But I will note that there have definitely been parts of the process, particularly where I set overly aggressive deadlines, given my standards for it, where my expected resources were below my commitment. So I had committed, okay, this is going to be done in, say, December, and then I didn't actually have the resources to do that. My abilities and the time I had, particularly given other time commitments, I couldn't do it in, say, December. And so that's a state of insecurity. Now, it's not exactly financial insecurity. It's related to financial insecurity, but I think it's often one that might be even more important and more salient than financial insecurity, but it's really time insecurity. So I'm saying that, yeah, I've committed to this thing, but I don't have the resources to actually do it. So I feel like I have this commitment, but I don't actually have the time to fulfill the commitment. And so that creates a feeling of insecurity. So that's a very salient example for me that's actually made me think of this, because then as I've gotten more to the state of security, I notice, wow, it is so much more enjoyable to be in this state of security, and it's easy to underestimate how joy-sapping the lack of security can be. Now, let me just add threats to this, or expected threats. So it's the current commitments, that's probably the biggest thing, but also expected threats. So you think about, okay, what are the different things that could happen to me? If you have a regular job, you can lose your job, or there could be some health issue, or there could be, those are definitely two of the big ones. It's like losing your stream of income, or something comes up that's going to take a lot of resources, or, financial resources, or take a lot of time, or take a lot of attention. And, when we're secure, we feel like, okay, I've got all these resources, including time, and I've committed to an amount that I'm very confident I can fulfill. And that includes, and I'm very confident I can deal with any kinds of reasonable threats that come. So when we're in that state, that's such a state of serenity and freedom compared to the state of insecurity. And I think the way we often in experience the time insecurity is in the feeling or the thought of overwhelm. So if you think about, when do I feel like, I'm too busy, I've got so much stuff, like I got too much to do, like that is the perfect signal of, okay, I don't have time security. I have overcommitted myself, or I have a bunch of expected threats that are way too big, or at least too big, compared to my expected resources. And the thing I just want to highlight is this experience of insecurity, this experience of overwhelm is so debilitating compared to not having it. And I think that it is almost universally ignored how much better it is to have the security. So when we're thinking about things like, okay, do I make this commitment? Like, do I commit my time in this way? Or do I spend money in this way? I think it's very helpful to have this equation of, okay, what are my expected resources? And that includes money you have in the bank, money you have invested. And then what are my current commitments and what are my expected threats? And the threats might be a little trickier to deal with, but certainly with the expected resources, there's a lot you can do about that in terms of just like when you think of, okay, I'm going to spend this money, how is that going to affect this equation? Am I going to go into the negative? And then there's a really high burden of proof on that because it's so much worse to be in this state of insecurity / overwhelm. I mean, overwhelm is a more acute experience of it, but I think it's a relatable one. And then the commitments is a huge one. I think this is the one where it's so easy to just be sloppy, where it's just like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that thing for work. Yeah, I'll agree to that. I'll agree to this. Even with agreeing to deadlines, like, oh yeah, it seems like it would be cooler to meet this earlier deadline versus this later deadline. Okay, but is that going to put you in a state of time insecurity or not? How can you set the deadlines where you can have a lot of time security, and then to go back to an earlier episode, where you can engage in reverse procrastination. So there's an art of giving yourself huge amounts of time security and then still figuring out ways to motivate yourself to do things quickly and to just be way ahead of the game. And that is a great feeling, just feeling on top of things, feeling like, yeah, I have the time and resources and abilities to do exactly what I am planning to do. Like I have more than that. And then that creates all sorts of freedom, and it makes the individual, experiences so much better. Versus if you take something like, okay, I keep bringing up money types of examples, and I'll say in a minute, it depends on your financial situation, but I'm thinking of myself particularly early in my career when I think, okay, yeah, I just really want to go to this restaurant right now. Like that would be fun. But if it's contributing to insecurity, it's like the experience in some way is going to get undercut, but my whole experience of life is going to get undercut. And that's the thing that I really want to bring to the fore, because it can kind of feel it can just be invisible in a certain sense, because it's just, oh yeah, that's just the way I feel. But then when you do have those moments or times when, oh, you do have the security back, then it's, oh my gosh, how did I ever live the other way? I don't want to live like that again. And so to the extent you've had that feeling, whether it's financial security or time security more broadly, like that is a really good thing to be aware of, and then to fight for, to say, okay, I want to have this time security all the time. So it's going to make me very wary of spending money where there's any kind of question of security. And it sure as hell is going to make me wary of overcommitting myself. That's just the thing where we just don't take seriously enough most of the time what it means to commit, what it means to commit to a project. And there's a great expression that I heard once. I don't know if Steve Jobs said it, was attributed several degrees of separation from him, but I think of it a lot. And it's, there's no such thing as a small project. I've probably mentioned it on this show before, but there's no such thing as a small project. And, in a sense, there's no such thing as a small commitment, but the real thing is just be super aware of making commitments and what those mean. And one of my favorite ways to do that is just to calendar the commitment. So if I'm thinking about it, like think about, okay, where does this fit on my calendar? And then how much time is this actually going to take? When is it going to happen? There's another exercise people do where they try to put it, like they'll put it on their calendar for the next week. So that'll really, because sometimes we think, oh yeah, if it's in June, that doesn't matter at all. But that just seems far away. That'll never come. But if we think about, oh, would I do this in the next week, or would I do this in the next 2 weeks? That can be a good kind of test. But even if you just calendar it anytime and you really look at it, that's better, particularly to go to an earlier topic that I talk about a lot in terms of time blocking and life blocking. If you have, in general, your life blocked out on your calendar, so okay, here's when I do this kind of work, here's when I do this kind of work, here's where I spend this kind of time, here's where I spend this other kind of time. Like if that's really in your calendar and okay, yeah, this is when I'm taking vacation, and this is when I go to, this is when I do my hobby, and this is when I spend time with my partner. Like if that's really planned out, and I am a big fan of planning those out because we only have so much time, and there's always way more than we could do. There's way more that we could do than we actually have time to do. So we can either confront that reality, as I talk about in How to Spend Time, that episode, or we can just waste the time in just cosmically enormous ways, I think is what usually happens. So if we can, calendar commitments and have, but that includes having our existing, desired ways of spending time in some way reflected in our calendar. So just to give you how I have it, I'll have, say, from 8 to 12 a.m. being, okay, I want to do long form content, whether it's the book I'm working on or a future thing. Like I generally want to spend 4 hours a day on that kind of thing. And then it could be, okay, and then in the afternoon might have a 2.5 hour block for more current content, like work on things like energytalkingpoints.com, a project of mine where it's, okay, yeah, I want to spend that much, I want to spend that kind of time on this. And then I have a project I'm working on, some of you know about Thoughtful. And so I block out a bunch of time for Thoughtful. And then I have, recreational time when I want to do jujitsu. I have a daily break I take in the middle of the day, including, taking a nap on the beach every day. And of course, have different kinds of appointments. And just when I look ahead, I block it out even when it's not specifically designed. And so when I look ahead on my calendar, I can see, oh yeah, there's all this stuff that I have going on. And so, yeah, if I make this commitment, where is that going? And what is it crowding out? And in terms of things like calls, I have 2 times of day when I do those. Just so you have an example of a concrete implementation of this, I'll take calls from 6:30 to 7 a.m. before I start my main work. And then I'll do them from 12 to 1, but then I do other things then, including, recording my podcast and having certain kinds of business meetings. So it, just by knowing really what I want to do, and by having the desired use of my time, plus my commitments, my explicit commitments in the calendar, it makes it so much easier to have that time security, because it prevents me from just making commitments that then later I will regret. And just to keep emphasizing the point, the being overcommitted is just, it's so unnecessary and it's so debilitating. It's just this continuous thing that can undercut life. It undercuts many people's lives, just their entire lives. It's just they're always overcommitted, always too busy, always too much to do. And there's no reason to do that. So we live, to connect this to my work on energy, like we live in a world where machines produce so much value for us that it's pretty easy to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and shelter ourselves and protect ourselves against all sorts of natural and man-made threats. Mostly the world is still natural threats. That's like, we've accomplished so much in large part because we get machines to do so much work for us, that there's no reason to really be insecure. Like, the insecurity that we have is overwhelmingly chosen by spending more of our resources than we really need to, and certainly by overcommitting ourselves. It's not usually that there's some terrible disease that's afflicted us and it's going to be enormous hospital bills. That can happen, but that's not the normal situation. The normal situation is just spending money I don't need to spend and or committing time I don't need to commit. And that includes committing to doing things faster than I need to commit to doing them. And if we can avoid that, life is so much different and better, and we can really enjoy living in a modern machine-filled world where, we're not being chased by a bear all the time. We're not on the verge of starvation. We're not on a subsistence farm. We're not hunter-gatherers who sort of have to wonder, is there enough stuff? Or we live in a world of abundance and safety. But if we abuse that by spending what we don't have or committing time that doesn't make sense to commit, then it's going to feel like life used to understandably feel like. And I think that's a lot of what goes on psychologically, is there's just so much fear. And I think when we experience anxiety, fear, when we're experiencing those things, it's sort of the same thing as primitive peoples experienced with things like the threat of starvation or the flooding that would happen that they couldn't cope with, or cold that they couldn't cope with, or predators they couldn't cope with, or certainly diseases they couldn't cope with. Like, it's kind of feels the same to us as it did to them, but there's no reason for us to feel that kind of fear in the world. But if we set things up so that we're overcommitted, and that our expected resources are lower than our current commitments and our expected threats, then it's just going to feel like the bear's coming after us. We're going to starve. But again, there's no reason, and that's such a negative to add to life. So if we can really just value the state of security and realize how strong a basis that is for joy, that's a great place to be in. Now, just one thing about money, I think spending money is great. And I think many people who are on the security side don't spend enough early, and more broadly, they don't spend their time in enjoyable enough ways. So if you're making, it's great to spend money on things that you enjoy. Just doing it from that place of security makes it consistently and truly enjoyable. So better to spend, better to have half the recreation budget, but spend it from the joyous position of security than to spend twice as much on recreation and then to have the undercutting feel of insecurity. So once again, just to give you the basic equation of what it means to have time, well, I'm calling time security, it's that your expected resources outstrip your current commitments and your expected threats. So if you keep that equation in your head and you always try to be positive on it, I think you'll find it leads to a lot more joy. All right, that is it for this week. As always, if you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. You can also discuss this stuff on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And I believe the website is back up. We're having an issue with the website where you sign up for the biweekly updates at humanflourishingproject.com. If for some reason it's not working now or at any time, just email me, alex@alexepstein.com, and just put subscribe HFP, and I'll make sure that somebody puts you on the list. All right. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Looking forward to being back on the regular schedule. So I will be back 2 weeks from now. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.